On campus.
And online.
Check it out.
This is URN.
Hello, a very warm welcome to The Big Picture. I am, as always, Felix Hawes. Joining us today on University Radio Nottingham is Hannah.
Hello.
Hello, Hannah. James.
Hello.
Hello. And Titus.
Hello, Felix.
Hello, Titus. Well, we've got quite the instalments today. We'll be talking about His Majesty the King and the very institution at the top of society, the monarchy. We'll be talking about the local elections. And we'll be talking about a certain Nottingham University alumni, Andrew Bridgen, who has joined Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party. But let's talk, first of all, about His Majesty the King and the monarchy. Of course, we had a coronation. I am impartial, as everyone knows, but there is one topic that I struggle to keep my impartiality, and it is this one, so I want to put that caveat out there first. When Her Majesty the Queen died, I did promise my big picture guests that we would debate the future of the monarchy, and now that time has come. So I want to make 2 points first of all. We've got lots of different things to talk about here: the coronation itself, the actual institution, what we think about it, whether it should exist, what we think is going to happen to it in the future. But I want to open with this. To the anti-royalists in the room, James.
Wait.
To you, I want to ask, a lot of monarchists and Republicans believed that following the death of a very popular person, individual, Elizabeth II, that the popularity of the monarchy would decrease. Yet opinion polls don't seem to show any difference, really, in popularity. So I want to know really what your thoughts are on that. Are you surprised by that? And then I'm going to go to Titus and Hannah afterwards with a question of 20 million people watched the coronation, just over 20 million. That's very decent in today's standings of viewing figures. But 27 million watched Queen Elizabeth II's when we had fewer people and fewer televisions. So do you think the monarchy, even though the support might be there, is maybe less relevant in society? But I'm going to go to you first, James.
Well, I'm surprised that the popularity didn't fall, partially because I was one of those people thinking that the popularity would completely not collapse, but fall drastically following the death of Her Majesty. I've been saying for years that it's not the popularity of the monarchy as an institution, it's purely the popularity of the Queen. But clearly, and again, as the only non-monarchist of the room, I feel a bit sheepish to say that, but I was proven wrong. The popularity of the monarchy itself as an institution has held out, very surprisingly in my opinion, which I think partially, retrospectively it's not that surprising in the sense that obviously the death of the Queen did lose this very important public figure, this very notable and popular public figure, but it didn't go away immediately. Obviously there was all the mourning and stuff, the queuing up for in London, which many people in the room did go to.
50% of the of this room did queue for Her late Majesty.
So there was a lot of time spent on the mourning, and I think that helped in a way garner a lot of sympathy for King Charles, obviously, because it's his mum. It's very sad for him, and it helped. I think it helped shore up the support for a royal figure who has not in history been the most popular. There's been lots of periods for multiple different controversies and reasons that Charles has not been the most popular of all the royals, to say the least. And I think that those few months following the death of the Queen very much set him up, to be a lot more supported because of the sympathy that was built up following the death of the Queen. So at the time I was surprised that the popularity of the monarchy didn't begin to go on a downward spiral following her death. But I think retrospectively I can see why. There's an obvious route as to why it didn't,
Thank you, James. Titus and Hannah, you're welcome to also answer on that, and then also address the fact that about the viewing figures of the coronation.
I think it's
important to point out that whilst the popularity of the monarchy hasn't changed a great amount since the Queen, Her Late Majesty, died, there is a clear fall away in the popularity among younger people compared to those who are older, which is concerning. And for us who wish to defend the institution, there are arguments that need to be made to ensure that in 4 or 5 decades' time, when those younger people are older, they do believe in this institution as something which connects us to our past and represents what is great about being British.
Hannah?
I was actually surprised because whilst my support for the monarchy didn't dwindle, I did expect some support to go after the Queen passed away, because I thought for a long time that there are people who, like James was saying, don't support the institution of the monarchy, but they very much supported the Queen because she was constant and she did so much amazing work for the country. So I was surprised, but I'm pleased that the support hasn't gone down, because I think I'm really happy that Charles and both Charles and Camilla have now been much accepted to a greater extent into society. I think that's a very, very positive thing. I think I was very happy to see the viewing figures of the coronation. I think that does show that there is still a lot of popularity out there. Again, it was surprising. I didn't expect there to be quite as much. So, yeah, it was nice to see.
I'd just like to add one thing as well, actually. I think one thing that we maybe have seen since the Queen's died, even if the popularity of the institution hasn't fallen, I think that the Queen was able to command respect among those who disagreed with the monarchy or didn't really like her. Everyone respected her, even though they were against the monarchy. I think with Charles that's slightly different. Maybe the support for the monarchy hasn't shifted, but those who oppose the monarchy are a lot less differential. They are a lot more open in opposing him, campaigning a lot of "Not My King" signs, which you just wouldn't have seen with the Queen. So I think there has been a shift in how the debate has been had, because those people who oppose are much happier to voice their opposition.
Yeah, and I think also because there's a lot of those people who probably, with everything that happened that was mentioned with Princess Diana, who are still probably very much hurting from that, and they have a preconceived kind of dislike towards Charles, and we always expected that to be an issue. It's nice to see it's not. I expected it to be a lot more of a problem than it appears to be, but yeah, I agree with you. I think Charles has a lot more support to try and win and maintain.
Well, we've had some messages in. Ben and Scarlett listening in from the North Hallwood IRA headquarters. Good to hear from them. Wonderful job, Felix. Keep up the good work on the show, guys. From Daniel. And, please turn Hannah's mic up. Okay, we'll do that too. Thank you for that message. Sorry, Hannah, I was just reading out and didn't read what you were saying before. Anyway, okay. Let's talk about the God Save the King has come in. Very good, very good. Let's talk about the institution of the monarchy then, as a broader sense. I'm going to go off the bat of what you just said there, Hannah, about the popularity of the king. His popularity is not as high as the Queen, and statistics show that, but his polling has gone up dramatically since he ascended to the throne.
Exceeded. Sorry, Felix.
I apologise. Sorry to our dear listeners. Thank you, Titus. So, with that in mind, though, his popularity figures are still higher than any politician. James, would you really prefer a President Johnson as our head of state over the king?
Wow. I feel like I need to preface this by disappointing all of the Republican listeners. I'm sorry, Ben and Scarlett. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't like the monarchy, but as I was saying before we came on, it's such a low bar issue for me that at the end of the day, I don't really care that much about it, But I'll try my best to be the anti-monarchist. The listeners truly want, I'm sure. So, do I want a President Johnson? I mean, obviously not. No one would want that. But
some people would, James.
Wow.
Not me, but some people would.
Nadine Dorries is probably begging for it.
But
she'd be the queen in your in your world, James.
But I think that I don't know. I think the monarchy. You were talking about what the monarchy represents, right, earlier, and I think part of my problem is I have a problem with that, because to me, I think the monarchy represents a wealthy and privileged elite that were born into a hereditary, system of power, not from their own hard work, just because their great, ancestors killed many people, made lucrative deals with other aristocrats, and that kind of thing. The room is heating up as I speak. So I don't think that they represent. I also think that there is a genuine legacy of colonialism and imperialism that is still attached to the monarchy, and so that's what I think that the monarchy represents to me. But again, you could say that the monarchy represents tradition and unity of the British people and all that stuff, And I wouldn't. Fair enough. Like I said, I don't care about it that much.
As you know, I'm very impartial, but the Commonwealth, the monarch is the head of the Commonwealth, which contains many former imperial colonies that are now independent states, and His Majesty the King is the head of state of many other former colonies, many of which recent opinion polling by Lord Ashcroft show that they are still in favour of him being their head of state. Papua New Guinea, for example, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea recently said, we want more monarchy, not less. Now, obviously, that's not the case for all the countries. Jamaica, for example, the leader of St. Kitts and the Nevis have said that we need to depart from the king. But the popularity of the monarchy is still actually relatively high in a lot of these countries. Ranges, Solomon Islands, I believe, is where the monarchy is least popular, this monarchy, the King Charles III, where about 57% of the population support a republic. But in other countries, it's very low. I'm cite Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Thank you very much. But there we are. Titus, I feel like you've got something to say.
The point I was going to make is you mentioned elites and how the monarch represents elites. I'm going to argue from the book of or from George Orwell's line of argument that for the socialist or the person who is unhappy with the power of elites in our country and certainly in the Western world, they should not be going after the monarchy. The true elites are the capitalist classes, the managerial class in our country who control the wealth, control a lot of property, the people that own big businesses. They are the true elites. The monarch is not. And if you are to attack the monarchy, you are attacking a high-profile figure and institution in our society that is separate from the capitalist elite and the capitalist system. And if you get rid of that, then all you're left with are elites that do hold economic power, capitalist power, who the socialists really ought to be concerned with. They shouldn't be concerned with hereditary landowners who no longer own much land and are a ceremonial leader and connect to our traditions. They should be concerned with J.D. Sainsbury's and Jim Ratcliffe. Those are the people that you really should be going after.
Yeah, I would also say, I think as well, it's important to point out that many of the royals actually do very hard work as well. I mean, King Charles has done lots of activism. He's worked very hard. Princess Anne is one of the hardest working royals. You know what I mean? I get James's point that I do have an issue with some of the royals having so much wealth when they haven't done much. They don't do much work for the public good. But the Queen did. King Charles does, Queen Camilla does, Princess Anne, and many others, Prince Edward. So I think it's worth pointing out that it's not just hereditary wealth that, yes, maybe on the face of it hasn't been earned, but they do a lot of work for charities, for causes, and actually having them as patrons of those causes is, I believe, a very positive thing and promotes them.
Titus, you mentioned about land. Well, if I'm not mistaken, the Crown is the biggest landholder in the country with the Crown estates. Do you have anything to say about that and maybe the way that it's taxed?
Well, what I was getting at was direct ownership, where one is in possession of and in control of, rather than a system that's more akin to patronage, which is maybe how the Crown operates. And the Crown, for instance, owns the seabed around our country, which has made it much easier for offshore wind to be built on their holdings. So the ownership of the crown, in a sense, is not dissimilar to ownership by our government or our nation of the land in our country. So there is a difference between private ownership and also the way that the crown runs it. So I think obviously my earlier statement was not quite correct in the in saying that they didn't own much land, but what I was getting at was that there's not a vast amount of private land that they're controlling for their own interests.
Yes, and the Crown Estate, of course, all profits from the Crown Estate go straight to His Majesty's Treasury, which of course is the government, and they can spend their money. We had some more. In fact, actually, the King is taxed more than anyone else because 85% of the Crown Estate profits go to the Treasury, because then 15% is taken from the sovereign grant, and the taxpayer pays 0p towards the monarchy. That is a not very well known amongst the population, but actually the taxpayer doesn't pay anything towards the upkeep of the monarchy. We've had some messages in. So we've got King Charles has more legitimacy to govern than Rishi Sunak, at least Proddy God, that must be Protestant God, anointed him to run the country. The only people who want Sunak as PM are Tory MPs and Titus. In response to Hannah saying the royals do a lot of hard work, it says, true, Hannah, bumping off Diana probably did take a lot of planning. I'm just reading out these comments.
This is why we need the Public Order Act to arrest people like him.
All panellists and listeners must attend Port and Policy on the 3rd of June, and that is from a mystery writer. I do wonder who that could be. Okay, let's talk about the coronation. It cost quite a bit of money, didn't it? About 100 million, it's estimated. James, is this money worth spending?
I mean, go on then. I mean, this is the shame. I feel like I'm really disappointing the Republican listeners here. But Titus's quote earlier not quote, but what he was saying about George Orwell, his argument for it earlier. I mean, I do agree with that. Like, at the end of the day, again, the monarchy is such a nothingy thing to me. The business leaders are the real problem, etc., etc. But yes, 100 million or whatever it was is, quite a lot of money to spend. But then it gets into an argument of, like, profits and stuff. And, if you look at how much money, like, how much the economy actually benefited, it gets to, like, a very large figure. And then there's a counterpoint of bank holidays always give, more money into the economy. And then it's like, well, this one did a little bit more. So then it just gets into an argument of, like, a tedious argument of semantics and...
Which you don't want to have, then, on the big picture.
Which I love, believe me.
Titus... The coronation's quite important in a religious setting. And not all listeners, of course, are going to be religious, but it's quite common, of course, for countries to have these ceremonies. And as we haven't had one in 70 years, actually the cost of our ceremonies to inaugurate, although we wouldn't call that in that way in this country, our heads of state is actually overall cheaper than a lot of countries. Is that something that you'd agree with?
It is, and I think the ceremony itself is incredibly special. It's something that has existed for 1,000 years or thereabouts. It's happened in Westminster Abbey since William the Conqueror, although obviously the Abbey has changed much and is actually no longer called Westminster Abbey. It's the Collegiate Church of St. Peter at Westminster, and it is not an abbey. But it has taken place on that site for 1,000 years, and the anointing ritual, which is what signifies Charles Windsor as the king, is something that stretches back into ancient history, into to biblical times, where, as we sing in the song Zadok the Priest, Solomon was anointed king. And so the tradition that underpins this ceremony and its place in our national history is as old as our country. And that is not a thread that we should discard lightly. It holds our national story together in a way that is personal, that is universal, that has represented so many different ages and eras, and you can see that all on display in the ceremony. And I think the way that Charles did it was fantastic. The way that he incorporated elements of modern Britain worked really well, and you can't just manufacture this in a Republican inauguration. You can't swear in a president and have the meaning and the history and the riches and the depth of the coronation. That's not just something you can make. It is something that is slowly gained over hundreds and hundreds of years.
And of course, Titus, when Solomon was anointed king, all the people rejoiced, didn't they?
They did. They sang, "Long live the king! God save the king!"
Alleluia, alleluia,
Biased
amen.
panel.
I'm impartial. Okay. Yes, and of course, in the coronation ceremony, the first word spoken by the king is that he was said that I come here not to be served, but to serve.
It's the first thing he said
Yeah.
upon entering the building.
Yeah.
So, which does show you the change of how it's done, but how we're still going. And I've just lost all the messages that were coming in. The thing's just gone. So don't know where that's gone. So apologies to anyone writing in. What do we think about the soft power of the monarchy? 90 countries were represented by either the head of state or head of government or a representative of that at the coronation. It's a significant gathering of world leaders. Of course, when His Majesty the King recently went on a state visit to Germany, he was given almost a 2-minute standing ovation by MPs of the German Parliament from across the political spectrum, on the right and the left and the middle. And there are a lot of plans from the government to use the monarchy to improve relations with Europe because of recent political ongoings regarding the European Union. What do we make to the soft power of the monarchy?
I think it's interesting because, as you've said, there are many countries in the Commonwealth that do still feel a strong identity to the monarchy, and we've seen that, as you said, with the recent visit to Germany. But I do fear that the Commonwealth may become smaller because there have been many countries who have said that they want to become republicans. I remember seeing an interview with Jacinda Ardern when she was still the president of New Zealand, and she was saying, in my lifetime I'd like to see it become a republic. So I think, whilst I think that the support within this country is more or less being maintained, I think I think that there may be fewer countries in the Commonwealth. I'm not sure over what time scale, but I think, it looks like there are, I think it was 6 out of 14 are now thinking that if they voted on the monarchy, they would become republics. So I predict that the Commonwealth will become smaller, and that could be to do with the Queen as well, because she was so central to it. They maybe don't feel the same affiliation to King Charles.
Yes, there certainly will be, as you say, polling does indicate that, but you never know. Opinion do shift. In fact, we mentioned St. Vincent and the Grenadines earlier. Popularity for the monarchy there seems to be higher than when they had a referendum on the issue about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, actually. You mentioned New Zealand. The good people of New Zealand do support the monarchy. James, your views on the soft power of the monarchy?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think it comes back a lot to what Hannah was talking about earlier with like the activism of people like Charles, his whole environmental thing. I think there is an element of soft power to it. I think it's, personally, I don't think it's really all that much. I think that the actual real soft power that we are given by being a monarchy instead of being a republic is quite negligible, in my opinion.
9 million people in France, for example, watched the coronation. 9 million.
Good for them. Do they respect the UK anymore because of it? Personally, I doubt it.
I think that's an interesting point. The point you make about respect, and obviously I commented on it at the start, but like Felix said, the 2-minute standing ovation in Germany in the Bundestag is quite something, and I actually think a monarchy compared to a republic is something which enables a leader to be more respected than a president, because a president is a politician. They need to be liked. They need to be voted on. They have promises to make. They often break those promises. They have a base. They have supporters, and they need to play the game. The monarch does not. The monarch has a longer term mindset. They're free from the short term flutterings and fickleness of politics, which enables them to be an individual who commands more respect. Even if not everyone supports them, they can be
Yeah.
someone who serves, who has a sense of duty. They always do. And that is because they've been raised in a way, they know they're inheriting the job, and so they have this sense of duty and respect drilled into them. They are prepared for the job from the moment they are born.
Yeah.
And it enables them to be a leader who can rise above the short-term back and forth of our day-to-day lives. And that is something that's amazing. And I think Charles, if you look at Hannah talked about their service, their charities, they give back more than any other public figure in our country. And in fact, I think if we did have some kind of election, we'd elect someone like Charles. He's the kind of person that you want. And the monarchy creates that person by being in the position of heir apparent or in that system. You are taught that your job is to serve, that you have this sense of duty, that you are that you need to behave in a selfless way. The monarchy is altruistic because it does not have to pander to people's votes. It is in service of the country. And I think when you take it when you bring it back to politics, if you were to have a president instead, make it political, you would lose that. And so I think if we want a leader that is like Charles, then it's got to be a monarchy. And I think credit to the Queen who's taken it in this direction, but it is something that is wonderful and that can be held up as something that's admirable and the best of our country.
We've had a comment saying, of course, the French had time to watch the coronation. They were probably on strike.
I mean, yeah, fair enough.
James.
I do have a bit of a problem with what Titus has said there. I don't know how to word it. The discussing about how they're raised from birth to do this job, how they're above the day-to-day squabblings of politicians, almost sounds like an argument for some sort of dictatorship. It not to be hyperbolous here, but if that's even a real word. But this sort of same argument has been made about military dictators. They're above the day-to-day squabbling of politicians.
No, that's not the argument that I'm making. Obviously, the monarch doesn't hold any political power, and that's essential. He's a representative, a ceremonial head of state. And if they did hold political power, then of course they have to be accountable to the people. Accountability is essential. And even the monarchy is subject to accountability. Edward VII, who was meant to be the next king after George V, was unsuited to the role. He wanted to marry an American divorcee. And I think Stanley Baldwin's government threatened to resign if he didn't abdicate. And he did abdicate and then went off and married her, which led to George VI becoming the next king. So there is a level of accountability. The Parliament also has a level of say in who inherits the throne. So it's not completely untrammeled. And I obviously don't support dictatorships.
No,
it's a very different question.
But I think... Oh, I just had a good point there, but I just lost it. That's a shame. Come back to me in 5 minutes. I'll think of it.
I agree. I think if I would never ever support the monarchy having political power. I would understand republicanism more if the monarch had political power, because that would be an unelected head of state making political decisions that affect us. And you could argue that Rishi Sunak hasn't been elected, but that's a whole, in typical parliamentary time, the Prime Minister is elected and he or she makes political decisions that affect us, but they are elected. If the head of state, the monarch, was making political decisions, I would be totally against that. But the monarch is very much a figurehead, and so I don't think that that's a viable argument. That we're having to, pledge allegiance to somebody who is unelected, because they're not really interfering with our lives in any way. So.
Meghan will always be my queen. A comment has come in saying that.
I remember.
Go on, James.
I remembered my point. You guys both just talked about how the monarch has no power, and that's a good thing. But right before then, we were talking about how the monarch has soft power, and therefore, is there not a contradiction there? That we're talking about both the soft power that the monarchy has, and at the same time, it's fine that they're not accountable because they have no power. Is there not some sort of contradiction?
Not at all,
that
James.
They have power, but they don't have power.
Of course not, James. The whole country, our culture, exerts a level of soft power. Hard power is things like military expeditions, international aid, hard things you can put a finger on, bills that you can pass. Soft power is a positive perception that you generate. And everyone, even in a small sense, has a level of soft power. And the king and all the trappings of the institution brings that to our country because of their historic nature and the respect that they're afforded.
What do we think, on the last point before we move on, do you think, let's say we all live hopefully long, happy lives, are we still going to see a monarchy when our time sadly comes to an end, at the end of our lifetimes? Do we think we're still going to have what would be probably then King George VII? Do you expect that to be the case?
That's a difficult one. I think, yes, I think in our lifetimes there probably will still be a monarchy, but I think it won't exist in the next generation. That's my prediction.
Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, I think it'll probably go on. Like I said, I think, though my view on it all is very ambivalent and sort of whatever, I do think that quite a lot of the population holds a similar, especially young people, as Titus I'm sure would agree, hold that sort of ambivalent whatever sort of attitude to the monarchy. And I think that means, for definitely a long while, it'll probably stick around until eventually in 100 years that I don't really care about it becomes, I don't care about this, so we should probably get rid of it. But I do think that is a long way away. And again, there are so many bigger issues to deal with. This is such a small fry, in my opinion.
It's also important to note that there has been times in the past where popularity of the monarchy has been lower than 50%, and the monarchy has still managed to survive that. That's even in democratic times as well. Titus?
I think it will endure. Obviously, it has endured for a very long time. There was a period where, a brief period where Parliament decided to remove the monarch and his head from his shoulders. But obviously the monarchy came back, and people, after the mess of the Cromwell's protectorate, people were crying for Charles II to come back. And I do think that it's easy to see our history and our current trajectory as a inevitable journey towards more progressive politics and potentially left-wing ideas. But I think the monarchy is something that has a unique appeal and that is also extremely adaptable. And I think William, the Prince of Wales, when he becomes king, he will be acutely aware of the pressures that are on him, and he will be adapting the monarchy to fit the age that it exists within. And I think there will also be there may be more discussions about it in the future, but I do think there are a lot of strong arguments, and it is something that unites us. We have these amazing parties. We had them on last weekend, which you just don't have in other systems, and there are a lot of good reasons why people will ultimately choose to accept it.
Yeah, I will just add one more quick point. I think, and it's completely just gone from my head. Just give me a second. I think it's important, actually, and I will say this as a monarchist, but I do believe it's important that King Charles seeks to, what he's saying needs to do is modernise the monarchy slightly. We've seen that already with certain things. I do think in order to keep the population engaged with the monarchy, that is important, because I think it should be modernised, but certainly, obviously not too much, but I think there needs to be some kind of progression to keep certainly the younger generations engaged, in my opinion.
Maybe King Charles... go on.
That's really good. That's really good. And I think they do need to keep them engaged. And I also just want to make one more point that the monarchy, compared to other systems, people accuse King Charles being out of touch because he's privileged. He speaks to more ordinary people than any other politician does. Yeah. He goes around speaking to people almost every day of his life. Keir Starmer, I'm sure he speaks to lots of focus groups, but he doesn't engage with the average people in our country in the way that the monarch does, or has the time to do, or has the energy to do. So I think that is something that does set the monarchy apart. And also, if you look at the monarchy, it is the fairest, from a feminist perspective, it's the fairest way of choosing a leader. If we had, you look at the French presidency, they've never had a female president. You look at the American presidency, never had a female president. But in the last 200 years, 133 of them
but I
has
do
had a
think the
female
fact
queen.
that it did until quite recently skip the female members of the family isn't particularly feminist, but you know,
that's
there
true.
we go.
That's true. But it's also the fairest conceivable system. There's a 50% chance that the next heir, when they're born, is going to be male, and 50% chance it's going to be a woman. It doesn't get fairer than that.
Well, maybe when we modernise the monarchy, Prince William might be crowned with a baseball cap to Cardi B or something like that. Okay, we have we've got a song request which will come later from our good friends in Beeson, but there was a great concert on Sunday which Take That performed this song, so enjoy.
This is URN.
Hello. Sorry about that. I thought it was going to stop playing the next song by accident, but it didn't. We're back on The Big Picture. I am Felix Hawes. Our second topic then is the local elections, which happened on the 4th of May last week, pre-coronation. Well, the Conservatives lost over 1,000 seats, and it's the first time since 2002 that the Labour Party are the largest party at the local level. It wasn't all doom and gloom for the Conservatives. There were 2 councils, I think, that they improved on.
Slough was one of them.
Slough, and they did improve slightly in others, but it was mostly quite abysmal for the Conservatives. But it didn't all go to Labour, and I think that's an important point to make, is where are these anti-Tory votes going to go in the general election? Are they going to go to Labour, or are they going to go to the Lib Dems and the Greens, or are they going to go back to the Tories or not turn out? These are all things to discuss, whether or not this would suggest a Labour majority or not, bearing in mind we're a year off, at least, till the next election. Okay, let's just start with the initial findings of the Tories losing over 1,000 seats. Titus, let's go to you first. What do you make of this?
Well, if you were to take John Curtis's view on it, he obviously made his prediction. If it was a general election, he got the adjusted vote and the nationally adjusted vote and plugged that into his model and came up with Labour falling short of a majority, which is certainly not good news for Labour. They have underperformed, you might say, because the Conservatives are in a very bad way and they've been in power for so long, yet with the current voting patterns, they're not gonna get to the mark that they need. And I certainly think that they've performed worse than Blair did in 96 and even Cameron did leading up to the 2010 election. So that is concerning, but I think the real takeaway, and obviously the Conservatives have tried to talk about that, how Labour have underperformed, but the thing that is concerning for the Conservatives is their very strong performance of the Liberal Democrats, especially in the South and in the Shire seats. They've gone big on NIMBY policies and they've really squeezed the Tory vote, which in a general election, even if Labour don't get over the line, which they probably would in a year's time when they have more of a platform and they have more of a vision and people are even more prepared to get rid of a party that's been in there for 14 years at that stage, it could make a Conservative defeat into a complete wipeout. A lot of their seats are have a Lib Dem runner-up who, if they were able to take the seat, could put the Conservatives in a seriously bad place.
As you pointed out, Titus, off air in our when we were listening to the wonderful Take That, Liberal Democrats are preferred by a lot of Conservatives to Labour, and if they're in a position where the Lib Dems have a resurgence, as you say, where they are in certain seats, let's take, I don't know, South East Cambridgeshire, where I'm from, the presence of Labour is basically non-existent, whilst the Liberal Democrats do have quite a good strong hold in that seat. And that's the case in a lot of seats. We could be seeing a wipeout there, as you say. One of the things that's important to note is we talk a lot about the red wall and the blue wall in politics, and they're very broad and terms. We know roughly what we mean by that. Blue wall being Tory Lib Dem type Remainers, more socially liberal perhaps, put off in the sort of post-Brexit years, but were maybe put off by Corbyn more, so stuck on a bit longer. The red wall are your more northern Midlands, working class towns, which are more maybe socially conservative, voted for Brexit, that went to the Tories in large ways in 2019. But the Tories lost in both seats. So they're not really holding on to any part of their coalition. Even in Lincolnshire, which is their strongest county, closely followed by James's Essex, they laid losses there as well. James, what do you reckon?
Well, over 1,000 seats lost. Almost 50 councils lost control of. Beautiful. Honestly, as a not the biggest Tory fan, as the listeners will probably know, it was a good night, I have to say. And the attempt to spin this as some sort of positive thing by Tories is quite hilarious to watch, in my opinion. And also, I think, quite negative for Tories themselves. I think, like, Greg Hansen stuff going on the news. I didn't stay up all night to watch the results, but I stayed up for quite a few hours until maybe 3 or 4 in the morning watching them. And just the non-stop Tory MPs who are saying, "Oh, it doesn't look good for Labour. You know, it's not good enough." The attempt to try and claim that this is some sort of Labour failure when your party lost 1,000 seats is completely ridiculous, and it shows at the core of the Tory party there's no new ideas, there's no attempt at innovation. You know, like, this would be a time to look inwards and say, and, you know, for the party to look inwards and say to itself, what are we? What, like, we need a clear, something's got to change here. Otherwise, you know, we're in for a similarly bad result at the general election. I think the attempts to say, "Oh, it's not good, it's not looking that good for Labour, you know, we only lost 1,000 seats," I think is completely ridiculous and shows a dying party, in my opinion.
I would say I am somewhere in the middle, because I agree it was carnage, that local election for the Conservatives, and, you know, on a human level it was really sad to see decent hard-working councillors lose their jobs because of some of the, you know, awful carnage that's happened at a national level. It was really sad to see for some of them, I will just say that. But I do think it's a bit rich to talk about clarity when I still have no idea what Labour stands for. You know, really, there's no clarity there either. I feel like I agree, James. I think that the Tories do need to look inwards and think what they really stand for, because I think, you know, some of the Conservative principles that should be adopted by the party have been lost. I think they need to do a re-exam, and they can't just carry on talking about the 5 pledges and hoping everything will go away.
One of those pledges, of course, sorry to interrupt you there, Hannah, has not been met already.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they do need to re-examine, and but I agree. I think Labour should have done a lot better than they did, because essentially the Tories have handed it to them. Really, they've given them such an open opportunity to get the next election. Unfortunately, I'm not a supporter of Labour, but they should have done better, because they've been given a chance essentially, and I believe the reason they haven't is because there's just. I watch so many political programmes with loads of representatives from both parties, and apart from a few small policies like the non-dom tax status, windfall taxes, apart from that, I really, really don't know what Labour stand for, and I think there's not enough clarity for the voters from the leadership. And I think, you know, I just think if they are wanting to get a majority, they need to be more clear, and I think I'm not surprised the Lib Dems did so well, because I think, like was said, there are some voters who did vote Conservative who have gone over to Lib Dem, and actually the Lib Dems, to give them some credit, when they say a policy, they explain it, and they often say how it would be done, whereas I don't feel Labour do. So I think, yes, it was awful for the Tories. I think they need to think about their strategy. I mean, I think a lot of it isn't, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, it's not his fault, it's his predecessors that have caused this, really. So he's got a heck of a job. They need to start thinking about more conservative principles, because I don't feel a lot of the party policies at the moment are very conservative. Some of them can't be, because of the economic climate we're in, but they need to think about their identity as a party. So that's the job for the Conservatives. If Labour want to win, they just need to say what they want to do and stop just attacking the opposition, attacking the Conservatives without saying how they do anything different, because that's all I hear at the moment. Lib Dems will just see, but I don't actually believe Labour will win a majority. I think it will be a hung parliament.
That's interesting.
I went on for too long there.
That's great. Just before you do, Titus, someone said evidently what the public is crying out for is the return of fox hunting. Titus.
Policy number 1.
The context that might be hazarding a guess. I sent an article to Ben Duffy about how fox numbers have declined dramatically since hunting was banned. But 6, right? Aside from that, I think almost Hannah, on your point about Keir Starmer not really having an identity or a platform, I think that's his plan. I think he wants to be everyone, everything to everyone. He doesn't want to offend anyone. He doesn't want to get on the wrong side of anyone. So he's trying to kind of play every position as best he can and not really annoy anyone, hoping that his vote holds up. And as people are irritated with the Conservative, their vote collapses. And that's, in my view, quite similar to David Cameron's strategy, not really owning his side of politics, the blue side, well, obviously in Cameron's case, the blue side, the Conservative side. In Keir Starmer's case, the left. He's not really owning that. He's trying to kind of distance himself from any clear markers or vision, but hoping that most people will go, he's different.
Exactly, yeah.
Even though he's actually quite similar to people we've had before.
Yeah.
So I think, like you say, that he's not going to win a big majority. He might win, given the changing situation in Scotland, I think he might win a small majority, but he's not. I don't think he'll romp the field. That doesn't mean that the Conservatives aren't in trouble, but I do think they have a path to reduce the damage and limit the impact of the last few years, which I do think, like you said, is the real problem, and that actually changing anything, like you suggested, James, would cause even more problems.
Well, what do you... Hannah mentioned there that the blame should really be more on Johnson and Truss. Do you think that's fair? And what do you think Sunak can do per se? Managed decline, I think, is what Priti Patel has labelled it. Already, there are rumours that some Tory MPs might be trying to plot a Sunak downfall. What do we? Well, Andrew Bridgen has left the party now,
that
so
says to me.
we don't have the Bridgen ometer on whether or not.
Felix, that does say to me that the press are bored with Sunak's less febrile politics and are looking for anything to try and create a storm in a teacup.
I'm really torn on this one because I think, yes, I don't think it should be blamed on Sunak, and I think he's in a difficult position. But I do understand that I think some of his his policies on immigration and certain other policies are very right-wing, but I think some of his economic policies at the moment aren't traditionally conservative. And I get that he couldn't do that to start with, and he has to be careful and precautious because of the economic climate we're in. But for example, things like the corporation tax, I think that was a wrong idea for it to go up, and I think he needs to look at policies and think about, in the long term, how he's going to, reduce taxes, think about being more economically conservative, because I just think he is losing some of the right of the party, and I think it's important. It's so important going into the next election. One of the things that is vital, I believe, to the Conservative, gaining a bit more popularity is to just unify the party, because there's been so much infighting, so much division. And I'm not saying I think he should just change policies to appease his backbenchers. I'm not saying that at all. But I mean is I think he needs to listen to all wings of the party, because otherwise he risks just losing the Conservative identity. And I think the gap between Labour and Conservative is so small at the moment anyway. It's going to be hard to distinguish either party soon unless they both a bit clearer.
Listen to the backbenchers. Maybe Boris Johnson should be the new Chancellor.
Please no.
I actually think Jeremy Hunt's done quite a good job as Chancellor. And like you say, you disagree with his corporation tax rise, but the situation in the autumn last year was fairly catastrophic, and he has come in, he's stabilised the ship. The OBR has upgraded the UK's growth forecast by its biggest amount ever, 2.25%. They've upgraded their forecast by. And so the policies, the stability, they've looked at focusing on certain sectors in order to really drive growth in places where the UK has a comparative advantage. I think that his approach is a good one. And I actually think that Sunak's overall approach of being very clear of what he's trying to do and then saying, mark me on my performance, is also the right one.
Yeah.
Given the last couple of years that we've had. If he can point to some measurable progress, then he might actually do quite well. I still think it's very, very unlikely he'll win, but I think he could put in a good hand next year.
Yeah, I think he needs to get, because he's stable. I'm not saying things are stable by any stretch of the imagination at the moment, but the sort of carnage caused by the government has stabilised somewhat, and I think now he needs to move past just stabilising and keeping things ticking over, and actually think long-term policies that he may, conservative policy he could now adopt. Things in the markets have calmed down a little bit. I know it's still a terrible situation, cost of living, that has to be the priority, but I do think he needs to look forward more now and give voters, or traditionally Conservative voters, more things to be excited about, if that makes sense.
One last point before we move on to our final topic. I want to talk about the Greens. The Greens did very well, surprisingly well, in the local elections, winning in places that you wouldn't naturally see a socialist party winning. It doesn't necessarily mean that the people of mid-Suffolk have suddenly become socialists. But what do you think this sort of means? Is this purely a local level, and that those votes for Greens will translate to the votes for Labour? Or is there a reason why people in, let's say, mid-Suffolk are voting for the Green Party and not Labour? And whether actually that doesn't necessarily translate to a Labour vote at the election. It could remain Green, or it could, of course, just not transfer to anything at a national level. What do you think to this?
Well, I think, personally, it is a purely local phenomenon. And I think a big part of this is that both the Greens and the Lib Dems are very good at honing in on the NIMBY vote, as was discussed earlier. And so I think they are very much overly represented in local elections and by-elections as well. The Lib Dems always do way better because, again, they're much better at focusing on these NIMBY issues. So I do think it's a very localised thing. I don't think it'll materialise really into any notable vote share, in my opinion. Yeah, I do think it is a shame. Overall, going back to what was spoken about earlier about the Tories, kind of collapsing, I do think it is a shame. Even though I am a big Labour man, I got to recognise that you got to have an opposition somewhat, And as Titus said, I'm worried that Labour's just going to coast its way into a victory, meaning that Keir will just do this, keep up this whole please everybody, say nothing all that controversial. I'm sure in the run up to the actual election itself there'll be clear policy proposals, but I want them to be innovative. I want them to be big deals, not to just coast and try and please everyone.
Do actual Labour policies as well. It's the same thing as like with the Conservatives. Do actual Labour policies.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there is just a problem of there is still the problem of just Labour just being the party that just says the Tories are so bad, we'll do it better. And I do think that there has been a real struggle with, actually being able to present that to the population. And partly because, Keir's not really pushing that. He's still, as was said, trying to just please everyone and offend no one. So I do hope that, he pulls up. Otherwise, you will have, going back to the question itself, otherwise you might have seats falling to you definitely will have seats falling to the Lib Dems, but you might have a couple of seats go to the Greens because Labour's not actually giving a real go at actually presenting something, and so this anti-Tory vote just remains an anti-Tory vote and not just not a Labour vote. It remains an anti-Tory vote, and in every individual seat, who knows what's going to happen? Some seats Lib Dems will take it, some seats Greens will take it, some seats whoever.
Yeah. And as the political wing of Just Stop Oil, they are, a danger to the country, to the coronation. This kind of relationship is, it's the kind of thing you've seen in Northern Ireland. We've got to be careful about these guys.
I do think, though, I would just say I'm not a Green Party supporter by any means, but at least you know what they stand for, which is more than can be said for Labour. And I'm just saying, if I had one, just going back to what James was saying about, them just being the anti-Tory party, if I had £1 for every time I've heard Keir Starmer give an answer to a question as 13 years of Tory failure, I could pay for the coronation.
Just
to put that out there.
It's interesting to see the Green Party block solar farms, though, at the local level. And their recycling levels in green areas are not the best. They have recently changed their policy on NATO membership, though, it's important to note. They used to be anti-NATO, but they changed it about a month ago, I think, to being in favour of...
Better late than never.
Of NATO. We're not going to have a musical break because we're already slightly over our hour, but I will just now briefly touch on our last topic. Andrew Bridgen, who was a Conservative MP, he's been expelled by the party because he made comparisons to the vaccine rollout being what he said, as a leading cardiologist told me, not named, the vaccine, something to do with the vaccines, the vaccine rollout is the biggest sort of crime against humanity since the Holocaust, which of course is deeply controversial and many would say highly offensive. And he's now joined Lawrence Fox's Reclaim Party. The Reclaim Party is one of many more minor right-wing parties. This could boost the Reclaim Party's presence on that fringe. The battle between them and Heritage and Reform UK and UKIP. The Patriotic Alliance, I don't know if that's a party or just a neo-Nazi group. So what do we... I should probably check that before. What do we think to this move?
I think it's a move of very little consequence, and Mr. Bridgen will be losing his seat in just over a year's time. So I can't see how it affects our politics much. No doubt Lawrence Fox can trumpet about how he now has a representative in the House of Commons, but it's an irrelevance, really. Maybe if you listen to GB News, you might have him on. That you might hear about him a bit more, but I don't think it affects our politics in any serious way. And I think Mr. Bridgen's career is over.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it was quite right for him to be removed from the Conservative Party, because I have a real problem with comparisons being made with Nazi Germany. Just almost flippantly like that. I mean, that is just ridiculous. There is no comparison. We saw earlier, I think, Gary Lineker's comments comparing the immigration bill to language used in Nazi Germany. I just have a massive problem with that in general, because I think it's such a serious and devastating, genocide of a group of people that was, there's no comparisons. There are very little comparisons that can be made to that. So I have a real issue fundamentally with anyone using that as a comparison. So I think, to start with, it was very right that he was removed from the Conservative Party, but as Titus was saying, I do think it's probably going to have very little consequence, because very few people, not very few, well, yeah, relatively few people hold the kind of extreme views that the Republican Party stand on, and I think, he's probably going to hope that that's going to make a difference, but I don't think it will.
I have to say, I got it wrong. It was Patriotic Alternative, which is a British far-right fascist, neo-Nazi and white nationalist hate group.
The viewers were furious that you got it wrong.
I apologise to viewers that are members of the South African Party, Patriotic Alliance, when I meant Patriotic Alternative. James, your views to finish us off.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's sad. I agree with what other people have said, or the other panelists have said. He's a bigot. He's a terrible person. He's going to lose a seat. It's very inconsequential. But I think it shows quite interesting psychological thing in the sense of there for the past few years, there's been quite a lot of stories of how his life in general has not been going that well. He lost lawsuits about family businesses. I know there was family dispute, family trouble in general. And I think is
this Lawrence or Andrew Bridgen?
Andrew Bridgen,
because they both
yeah. But I think it does show a sort of, in a way, a potentially familiar story to some listeners of someone who went through a really bad period in their life, and then turned to conspiracy theory and some sort of generally far right ideology. I think you see it a lot more in America, obviously, but I do think you are beginning to see it here, where people who go through life-ruining, situations over such a long period of time, and then they see a sort of way out as it's sort of like, I'm not a psychologist, obviously, apologies to any psychologists listening for this rudimentary attempt at psychology, but you sort of, it gives an easy way out of my life's been ruined, but it's fine because all these conspiracies, everyone's against me kind of thing. It's sort of...
And obviously Hunter Biden, the famous neo-Nazi in America.
I think... I think it gives an easy way out for a lot of people who've had these sort of disasters in their life to sort of almost shirk responsibility and reassure themselves that it wasn't their fault, the world is against them, and then from there it just snowballs into Andrew Bridgen says this type of thing. A year ago he was saying what I guess would be called vaccine questionable things, and then people were like, you're a moron, this is don't do that. And then he believes, this just confirms my viewpoint, everyone's against me. And then you fall further and further. And I think instead of, just seeing some random friend who you don't talk to anymore because he really likes Enoch Powell a bit too much, instead we see him as an MP who's talking about vaccines and making anti-Semitic remarks about them. So I think that it is, in a way, sad. I think from a purely political point of view, completely inconsequential. He's going to lose a seat. The party's not going to gain any seats. The continued, I'm sure in a few years' time we'll be talking about a few different right-wing parties instead of Heritage Party and Reclaim. It'll be a few other ones of a similar nature, similar popularity. I think, to be honest, that sort of fringe is basically meaningless and irrelevant.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to today's show. We've talked about quite a lot of things there. Thank you to Hannah, James and Titus for coming on. I have been Felix Hawes. This has been University Radio Nottingham and The Big Picture. Thank you to our loyal listeners. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the song you requested, but I'll make the effort to ensure that my loyal friends and fans in Beeston do get their song next time. But as it is Eurovision this evening, we're going to be playing now I Wrote a Song, which is our entry. So enjoy and see you next week.